My name is Lonnie Walker, a 32-year-old cybersecurity expert from Boston. My sister Amanda and I have been inseparable since we built our first blanket fort at ages 6 and 4. So when my dad called with that gut punch, I nearly dropped my phone. The Hastings don't want you at the wedding, son. They told Amanda you wouldn't too fit in. My chest tightened as I processed this betrayal from my own sister. Julian Hastings and his wealthy family had finally turned her completely against me. I smiled grimly, opened my laptop, and logged into the system that managed their entire business empire. Little did they know, I held the keys to their financial kingdom. If you're enjoying this story so far, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and stick around to see how I made the Hastings family regret crossing me. Amanda and I grew up thick as thieves. Our childhood home in suburban Massachusetts wasn't fancy, but it was filled with laughter. I remember teaching her to ride a bike when she was 7, running alongside her with my hand on the seat until she yelled, "Let go, Lonnie!" Her pigtails flying in the wind as she pedaled away on her own for the first time. We spent countless summer days building elaborate forts in the backyard, creating worlds where we were the heroes of our own adventures. Everything changed when our parents' marriage fell apart. I was 14 and Amanda was 12 when the fighting became unbearable. The divorce was messy, with Dad moving into a small apartment across town while Mom kept the house. Amanda would crawl into my room at night when Mom's crying became too much to bear. "Will we be okay?" She'd whisper, and I'd promise her we would, even though I wasn't sure myself. We created our own stability in the chaos. Every Saturday morning, without fail, I would make pancakes for us both. It started simple, just the boxed mix, but over time I learned to make them from scratch. Blueberry for her, chocolate chip for me. It was our ritual, our constant in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. When I was 17, I took on extra shifts at the local electronics store to start saving for Amanda's college fund. Our parents were struggling financially after the divorce, and I knew college would be expensive. Every paycheck, I'd put aside $30 into a special account. It wasn't much, but by the time she graduated high school, I had saved enough to buy her a laptop for nursing school. Amanda's college years brought new challenges. She started dating a guy named Tyler during her sophomore year. At first, he seemed nice enough, but I noticed how she stopped calling as frequently, how her voice sounded different, more cautious, when we did speak. It took 6 months before she admitted he had been controlling her every move, checking her phone, and isolating her from friends. I drove 3 hours to her campus the night she called crying. We packed her things while Tyler was at a basketball game, and I helped her move into a new dorm with supportive roommates. That night, as we sat in a 24-hour diner drinking milkshakes, she thanked me for always being her protector. After college, I worked my way up from an entry-level IT help desk position to a specialized role in cybersecurity. My natural talent for identifying system vulnerabilities quickly caught the attention of my supervisors. Within 5 years, I landed a senior position at CyberShield Solutions, one of Boston's premier cybersecurity firms. As the lead security architect, I managed protection systems for some of the city's most prominent businesses and institutions. The work was challenging, but rewarding. I took pride in being the guardian of digital fortresses. Amanda followed her dream of becoming a nurse and secured a position at Boston Memorial Hospital, one of the most prestigious medical centers in the Northeast. Her compassion and work ethic quickly made her a favorite among patients and colleagues alike. She would call me on her breaks, sharing stories about the lives she'd impacted that day. I could hear the fulfillment in her voice. That's where she met Julian Hastings, a surgical resident from one of Boston's wealthiest families. Amanda called me the day after they first spoke, gushing about the handsome doctor who had asked for her number. "He's brilliant, Lonnie," she said, "and he has this confidence that just fills the room." Our first double date with Julian, and my then-girlfriend Melissa, was at an upscale restaurant I could barely afford. Julian arrived in a Tesla, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He was charming, no doubt about it, tall with perfect teeth, and the polished manner of someone who attended the finest private schools. But I noticed how he referred to the waitstaff, the slight condescension in his tone when Melissa mentioned her job in retail. "Where did you attend university?" was one of his first questions to me. "State school," I answered honestly. "Computer science." "Ah," he nodded, a flicker of judgment crossing his features before his smile returned. Interesting choice. Despite these subtle warning signs, Amanda was quickly swept off her feet. Julian took her sailing on his family's boat, flying in private planes for weekend getaways, and introducing her to a world of luxury she had never experienced. Within months, I barely recognized my sister. Her casual style was replaced with designer clothes, her natural curls straightened into sleek blowouts, her schedule suddenly filled with charity galas and country club events. When I expressed concern about how fast things were moving, Amanda brushed me off. "His family is just traditional, Lonnie. They have certain expectations." There was a defensive edge to her voice I'd never heard before. The contrast between our lives grew more pronounced. My modest apartment, with its IKEA furniture and gaming setup, versus Julian's waterfront penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows and artwork, I was afraid to stand near. I started feeling uncomfortable when visiting them, sensing that I didn't belong in their world. But I tried to be supportive. Amanda seemed happy, and ultimately, that's what mattered most to me. What I didn't realize then was how deeply the Hastings family would come to influence every aspect of my sister's life, and how dramatically they would test the bond between us. 6 months into their relationship, Amanda called with news that felt like both an honor and a summons. "Julian's parents want to meet you," she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "They're hosting dinner at their estate this Friday." The Hastings estate was located in Brookline, an affluent suburb known for historic mansions and old money. I remembered feeling underdressed in my best button-down shirt and slacks as I drove through wrought iron gates and up a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges. The house, mansion, really, was a sprawling colonial revival with white columns and expansive grounds that seemed to stretch for acres. A uniformed housekeeper answered the door, and I was ushered into a foyer with marble floors and a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my annual salary. Family photos lined an antique console table, Julian in sailing attire, graduation pictures from prestigious institutions, professional portraits of the entire family in coordinated outfits on a beach somewhere tropical. Richard Hastings, Julian's father, met me with a firm handshake and assessing gaze. As the CEO of Hastings Development Group, one of Boston's largest real estate development companies, he carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. In his 60s but fit and distinguished with silver hair, he wore casual clothes that I recognized as brands far beyond my budget. "So you're Amanda's brother," he said, more statement than question. "Julian mentions you work in computers?" Before I could clarify my actual role, Eleanor Hastings glided into the room. Julian's mother embodied old money refinement, slim, elegant, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and the kind of subtle cosmetic work that didn't announce itself but erased any hint of aging. She extended manicured fingers for a limp handshake. "Charmed," she said, though her expression suggested otherwise. "Amanda speaks so fondly of you." Julian's siblings completed the picture of the perfect American dynasty. Maxwell, the older brother and vice president of the family company, had Julian's good looks with an added edge of ruthless ambition. Victoria, the younger sister who apparently held some executive position in the fashion industry, assessed me with the same critical eye one might use to examine a questionable piece of merchandise. Dinner was served in a formal dining room with hand-painted wallpaper, antique silver service, and a chandelier that made the foyers seem modest. The table could have seated 20, but we were positioned at one end, with Richard at the head. The conversation quickly turned to education. "Where did you attend school, Lonnie?" Eleanor asked, delicately cutting her salmon. "I graduated from Massachusetts State," I answered, already sensing this was the wrong answer. "Oh." Her eyebrows rose slightly. "No graduate studies?" "My technical certifications are equivalent to master's level work in my field," I explained. "Cybersecurity evolves so quickly that practical experience and ongoing certification are often more valuable than traditional degrees. Richard cleared his throat. Julian was accepted to all the Ivy Leagues, of course. We encouraged him toward Harvard, since that's where the family traditionally attends. The pattern continued throughout dinner. Every question seemed designed to highlight the gap between my background and theirs. When I mentioned my role as a cybersecurity consultant, Richard dismissed it as glorified IT work, despite the fact that my team protected millions in assets for companies like his. Victoria made several comments about Amanda's transformation, as she called it. "You should have seen what she was wearing when Julian first brought her home," she said with a laugh that contained no actual humor. "We've had quite the project on our hands." Maxwell dominated conversations by dropping names of politicians and business leaders he apparently golfed with regularly. Of course, when the governor and I discussed the new waterfront development last month, he would begin, making eye contact with everyone except me. Throughout this, Julian remained mostly silent, occasionally nodding or offering a tight smile. Amanda, usually vibrant and quick-witted, seemed to shrink in her chair, laughing nervously at the Hastings jokes and giving me warning glances whenever I started to respond more assertively. After dinner, we moved to a wood-paneled study for drinks. The conversation shifted to politics, with Richard lamenting tax rates on successful people and Eleanor bemoaning regulations that affected their business interests. "The problem with this country," Richard proclaimed, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler, "is that people want handouts instead of working hard like we did." I couldn't help myself. "With all due respect, sir, didn't you inherit the initial company from your father?" The room went silent. Julian coughed uncomfortably. "I built it into what it is today," Richard replied coldly. "From 3 properties to 300. That takes vision and work ethic, something many in your generation seem to lack." The drive home with Amanda was tense. Instead of the sister I knew, who would have laughed about the awkward evening with me, she was angry. "Why couldn't you just make an effort, Lonnie? You were being deliberately difficult." "Me? They spent the entire evening talking down to us both, and you just sat there taking it." "They're going to be my family," she snapped. "You could try to understand their perspective instead of judging them." I didn't recognize the person sitting beside me. It felt like Julian's family had already begun erasing the sister I knew. 2 weeks later, while reviewing client accounts at work, I made a surprising discovery. Hastings Development Group was listed among CyberShield's clients. We managed their security infrastructure, including the systems that handled their financial operations, vendor payments, and internal communications. I felt a surge of hope. Perhaps this connection could help bridge the gap. Maybe Richard would see me differently if he understood that my company was responsible for protecting his business assets. I decided to mention it casually at the next family gathering, thinking it might earn me some respect in their eyes. Little did I know then how significant this professional connection would ultimately become. The following Sunday, Amanda invited me to brunch at the Hastings Country Club. "Try harder this time," she texted along with the details. "Wear something nice." I put on a collared shirt and sport coat, determined to make a better impression for Amanda's sake. The country club was predictably exclusive, a sprawling complex with manicured golf courses and a clubhouse that resembled a small palace. Members arrived in luxury vehicles and greeted each other with the easy familiarity of people who've shared the same privileged spaces for generations. Richard spotted me as soon as I entered the dining room and waved me over to a table near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the 18th hole. "Lonnie," he said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Amanda tells me you work in computer security. What exactly does that entail on a day-to-day basis?" I launched into an explanation of threat assessment, system vulnerabilities, and protection protocols, trying to translate the technical aspects into terms he might appreciate as a businessman. "Essentially, we're the digital equivalent of your physical security." Victoria cut me off mid-sentence. "God, this sounds dreadfully boring. Julian, tell everyone about that procedure you assisted with yesterday. The one with Senator Mitchell's wife." Throughout brunch, this pattern repeated. Any contribution I attempted was either interrupted, dismissed, or met with blank stares before someone changed the subject. Eleanor spent considerable time discussing Amanda's progress, speaking about my sister as if she were a project rather than a person. Your posture has improved immensely, dear, Eleanor noted, touching Amanda's shoulder. Those etiquette sessions are paying off. Now, we just need to work on your table conversation for the larger dinner parties. I watched in disbelief as Amanda nodded appreciatively. Thank you for your guidance, Eleanor. I want to represent Julian properly. The sister who once told off a condescending professor was now accepting instruction on how to sit correctly. Even more concerning, I noticed she had begun adopting the Hastings speech patterns and mannerisms, the slight tilt of the head when listening, the specific way they held their silverware, even certain phrases that sounded foreign coming from her mouth. Over the next few months, my relationship with Amanda deteriorated at an alarming rate. We had standing sibling dinners every other Thursday, a tradition we'd maintained for years. She canceled 3 in a row, with last-minute texts. Eleanor surprised us with opera tickets, or Julian's colleague invited us to a fundraiser. When we did communicate, her responses were delayed and brief. One Tuesday morning, I stopped at a coffee shop near my office and overheard a familiar voice from a nearby table. Maxwell Hastings sat with 2 business associates, apparently unaware of my presence a few tables away. So Julian's still marrying the nurse? One man asked. Maxwell chuckled. Mother's working on refinement. The girl's adaptable enough, but that brother of hers is beyond help. Complete tech nerd, 0 social graces. Father nearly had an aneurysm when he suggested we were born with advantages. The men laughed, and I sat frozen, coffee cooling in my hands as they continued dissecting my character and background. The raw disdain in Maxwell's voice made it clear. I wasn't just imagined as different from them. I was considered fundamentally inferior. The engagement party, a week later, confirmed my growing suspicions. Held at an exclusive downtown venue, the event featured ice sculptures, a string quartet, and at least 200 guests who all seemed to know each other. My parents and I were seated at a table far from the main family grouping, practically in a different room. When Julian's father gave a toast, he spoke warmly about welcoming Amanda into our circle, but failed to acknowledge her family entirely. I watched my father, a hard-working man who had built a respectable career as a mechanical engineer, being treated as if he were invisible by Richard Hastings. My mother, who had put herself through night school to become a teacher while raising us, was given the same dismissive glances by Eleanor that one might give to catering staff. They certainly know how to throw a party, Dad said on the drive home, his voice tight. They certainly know how to make people feel unwelcome, Mom countered. Did you notice how Amanda barely spoke to us? She seems different. She's changing to fit their world, I replied, staring out the window at passing streetlights, and forgetting where she came from in the process. My concern about the Hastings family's influence took a professional turn when I began noticing troubling patterns in their business operations during routine security monitoring. My position gave me legitimate access to system logs and transaction records, all standard for ensuring security compliance. What I found was concerning. Hastings Development Group had a pattern of delayed payments to smaller contractors, often stretching payment terms far beyond contracted agreements. There were numerous complaints from tenants about maintenance issues in their properties being ignored. Several zoning applications contained discrepancies that allowed them to bypass affordable housing requirements. When I carefully mentioned some of these observations to Amanda, suggesting that Julian's family business practices seemed questionable, she became immediately defensive. You're just looking for reasons to dislike them, she snapped. Every real estate company has tenant complaints. They run a successful business, Lonnie. Maybe you're just jealous. The accusation stung precisely because it contained a small grain of truth. While I wasn't jealous of their wealth specifically, I did envy the easy way they had inserted themselves into Amanda's life and separated her from me. The sister who had once trusted my judgment above all others now dismissed my concerns without consideration. Julian, who had been cordial if somewhat distant previously, grew noticeably colder in our interactions. At a family birthday dinner for Amanda, he barely acknowledged my presence, speaking over me when I tried to share childhood stories and checking his phone whenever I was talking. The final months before the wedding brought a series of painful revelations. Amanda had always dreamed of getting married at Lakeside Gardens, a modest but beautiful venue where our parents had renewed their vows on their 20th anniversary. One evening, she called to tell me the wedding had been moved to the Hastings Country Club instead. "Eleanor thinks it's more appropriate for the number of guests," she explained, though I could hear the disappointment in her voice. "But what do you want, Amanda?" A pause. "I want Julian's family to be happy with the wedding. This is important to them." When wedding invitations were mailed, my parents received theirs promptly. Days passed, then a week, with no envelope arriving for me. When I texted Amanda asking about it, she replied with a vague message about invitation batches and promised to check. Another week passed in silence. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. The Hastings were systematically cutting me out of my sister's life, and even more disturbingly, Amanda was allowing it to happen. 3 weeks before the wedding, my father called asking to meet at Denny's Diner, our traditional spot for serious conversations. My stomach tightened as I agreed to meet him that evening. Dad rarely initiated these talks unless something was significantly wrong. Denny's hadn't changed in 20 years. The same worn vinyl booths, slightly sticky laminated menus, and the comforting smell of coffee and grilled onions. Dad was already there when I arrived, nursing a mug of black coffee, his weathered hands wrapped around it as if seeking warmth despite the June heat outside. "Son," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. He looked older than his 60 years, new lines etched around his eyes. "I've got something difficult to tell you." The server came by, and I ordered coffee more to delay the inevitable than from any desire for caffeine. When she walked away, Dad took a deep breath. "I got a call from Richard Hastings yesterday." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "He informed me that the wedding invitation list has been finalized and that you won't be receiving one." Despite the warning signs of recent months, the confirmation hit like a physical blow. "What? Why?" His exact words were that the Hastings family doesn't feel you would fit in with the atmosphere they're trying to create. Something about concerns that you and Julian's colleagues wouldn't mesh well. Dad's knuckles whitened around his mug. I told him it was unacceptable to exclude my son from his sister's wedding. He said the decision was final, and that Amanda agreed it would be easier this way. The diner continued its normal evening rhythm around us, plates clinking, muted conversations, the sizzle of the grill, while my world tilted on its axis. Amanda agreed? She actually agreed to this? Dad nodded, his eyes reflecting my pain. I called her right after. She said she's caught between two families and just wants peace. That sometimes compromises have to be made. Compromises? My voice rose enough that a couple at a nearby table glanced over. I lowered it again with effort. Cutting me out of one of the most important days of her life isn't a compromise, Dad. It's a complete surrender to people who see us as inferior. I know, son. He reached across the table and placed his hand on mine, a rare gesture from my stoic father. Your mother and I are considering not attending in solidarity. But Amanda broke down crying when I suggested it. She's not thinking clearly right now. The progression of emotions came in waves, shock giving way to hurt blossoming into anger. I tried calling Amanda 3 times that night after leaving the diner. Each call went straight to voicemail. Around midnight, a text finally appeared on my phone. It's just easier this way. Please understand. The Hastings have certain expectations for the wedding. I'll make it up to you, I promise. I stared at those words until my vision blurred. The sister who had once hidden in my room during thunderstorms because she felt safe with me was now cutting me out of her life to please people who looked down on our entire family. Sleep eluded me that night. I paced my apartment, alternating between hurt, rage, and disbelief. Around 3 in the morning, I called my best friend Troy, forgetting the hour until his groggy voice answered. "They're not inviting me to the wedding," I said without preamble. "What? Who?" Troy's voice sharpened with awareness. "Amanda's wedding? That can't be right." I explained the situation, while Troy listened in stunned silence. "Maybe just let it go, man," he finally suggested. "Weddings are stressful. Once they're married and things calm down, Amanda will come back to her senses." "Let it go?" I repeated. "So the Hastings learn they can just disrespect our entire family and there are no consequences?" Sometimes keeping peace is more important than being right, Troy said carefully. If you push this, you might lose Amanda completely. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, Troy's words echoing alongside the Hastings dismissals and Amanda's betrayal. A realization crystallized as the first rays of sunlight filtered through my blinds. Accepting disrespect only invites more disrespect. The Hastings had been testing boundaries from the beginning, seeing how much they could push before meeting resistance. And finding none, they had pushed all the way to excluding me from my only sister's wedding. That morning, I went to work earlier than usual. With new determination, I began a deeper investigation into Hastings Development Group's business practices, not out of spite, but with professional thoroughness. What I found confirmed my earlier concerns and revealed new issues. Their pattern of delaying payments to smaller contractors often stretched to 90 days, forcing small businesses into cash flow problems while the Hastings sat on the money. Maintenance staff at their properties were consistently underpaid compared to industry standards, with several complaints about wage violations filed but quickly settled with non-disclosure agreements. Multiple lawsuits from tenants had been quietly resolved and buried beneath legal maneuvering. The company regularly used its influence with city officials to expedite permits while sidestepping regulations that would have required more affordable housing units in their luxury developments. I wrestled with the ethical implications of using my professional position to dig into these matters. As a security consultant, I had legitimate access to their systems, but my personal connection created a conflict of interest. I spent a lunch break walking through Boston Common, debating with myself about the right course of action. The decision crystallized that evening when I saw a social media post from Eleanor Hastings, Amanda in a high-end bridal salon, surrounded by Eleanor and Victoria trying on wedding gowns. The caption read, "Helping our future daughter find the perfect dress." My mother had dreamed of this moment with her only daughter since Amanda was a child. Now she was excluded, just as I had been. That night, I initiated what appeared in all documentation to be a standard security audit of Hastings Development Group's systems, something my company regularly performed for clients. Everything I would do would be technically legitimate, documented, and defensible from a professional standpoint. If the Hastings wanted to play power games, they were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong opponent. As lead security architect at CyberShield Solutions, my job involved protecting our clients' digital infrastructure from external threats, while ensuring their internal systems operated with appropriate controls and safeguards. For most clients, we implemented industry-standard protocols with regular updates and monitoring. High-profile clients like Hastings Development Group received enhanced security measures due to the value of assets under protection. What many clients failed to understand was that true security often meant protecting them from their own poor practices. The audit I initiated for Hastings Development Group was entirely legitimate. A comprehensive review of their systems, with particular attention to financial controls and transaction approvals. These were standard security measures that any responsible firm would implement. My first discovery was concerning but unsurprising. Their financial infrastructure was outdated and vulnerable. Like many traditional companies run by older executives, they had resisted digital transformation, resulting in a patchwork of legacy systems with numerous security gaps. More troubling was their casual approach to access management. Too many employees had administrative privileges, and password protocols were virtually non-existent. I recalled visiting their offices for an initial system review months earlier, before the wedding drama began. Richard Hastings had proudly shown me his corner office with its impressive view of Boston Harbor. What stood out in my memory was not the view, but the yellow post-it note attached to his monitor with what appeared to be a password. So much for executive security awareness. Following proper protocol, I sent formal notification to the company about required system maintenance and security upgrades. The email went to their IT director with copies to executive management, including Richard. It outlined the standard enhancements we would be implementing to better protect their assets, including implementation of enhanced approval workflows for financial transactions, multi-factor authentication requirements for administrative access, systematic review, and flagging of unusual transaction patterns. The language was intentionally technical and formal, the kind of communication executives typically glanced at before forwarding to IT staff. The email concluded with a date and time for implementation, strategically chosen for 10 o'clock on a Sunday night when systems would be largely inactive. That Sunday, I worked late at the office, ensuring complete documentation of every action. Each security enhancement was implemented according to best practices, with detailed logs of all changes. The new protocols required administrative approval for all transactions over $5,000, multi-factor authentication for system access, and placed temporary holds on any unusual payment patterns, pending security review. For anyone reviewing my work, it would appear as nothing more than diligent security management. In reality, I had created a sophisticated approval bottleneck that would affect every aspect of the Hastings business operations, all under the guise of protecting them from potential threats. The following Monday morning, minor confusion began at Hastings Development Group. Several routine vendor payments failed to process, generating system notifications about pending security approval. Their IT director sent a polite email asking about the new protocols, which I answered with a detailed technical explanation and assurances that the system was functioning as designed to protect against fraud. By Tuesday, the confusion had evolved into concern. Their accounts payable department reported numerous failed payment attempts, and vendors were beginning to call about delayed transfers. I responded to increasingly urgent emails with calm professionalism, explaining that the security system was identifying potential irregularities that required review, standard procedure for financial protection. Wednesday brought the first real crisis. Their payroll system attempted to process the bi-weekly payments for over 300 employees and encountered critical validation errors. The system correctly identified this as a large, time-sensitive financial transaction requiring enhanced security verification, exactly as it was programmed to do. At 11:30 that morning, Richard Hastings himself called CyberShield's main line, his voice audibly strained as he demanded immediate assistance. The call was routed to our client services team, who noted the urgent nature of the request and asked which security consultant should be assigned. "Send your best person," Richard demanded. "This is a crisis situation." I volunteered to personally handle the issue, citing my familiarity with their systems. No one at CyberShield questioned this. I was the lead architect, after all, and taking responsibility for a high-profile client issue was expected. From my office, I remotely monitored the situation as Richard attempted to override the security protocols. Each attempt generated new authentication requirements and system flags. I could almost picture his growing frustration as the system thwarted his efforts to force transactions through without proper verification. My phone rang shortly after 1 o'clock. It was Amanda. "Lonnie, something weird is happening with the wedding payments," she said, sounding stressed. "Eleanor is freaking out because the deposits for the flowers and catering are showing as pending in their account. The vendors are threatening to cancel if they don't receive payment by tomorrow." "That sounds stressful," I replied carefully. "Maybe they're having some bank issues?" "Julian says his dad is dealing with some company-wide computer problem. I don't really understand it." She paused. "I know things have been weird between us, but I miss you, Lonnie." The genuine emotion in her voice nearly broke my resolve. "I miss you too, Mandy." I used my childhood nickname for her, testing whether the sister I knew was still there. A small sob escaped her. I never wanted any of this to happen. The Hastings just have such strong opinions about everything, and Julian gets caught in the middle, and I just want everyone to get along. "Even if that means excluding your brother from your wedding?" Silence hung between us. "It's complicated," she finally said. "I should go. Eleanor needs help, calling vendors to explain the payment delay." After hanging up, I turned my attention to a more concerning discovery. My security review had flagged numerous payments coded as consulting fees to offshore accounts, each just under the threshold that would trigger regulatory reporting requirements. While not definitively illegal, the pattern raised red flags about potential tax avoidance or worse. I documented these findings carefully, ensuring everything was properly logged in our security monitoring system. Then I scheduled a formal meeting with Richard Hastings for the following morning, not as Amanda's excluded brother, but as the senior security consultant assigned to resolve their critical system issues. The Hastings Development Group headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Boston's financial district. I arrived precisely at 9 the next morning, dressed in my most professional suit, carrying a laptop and tablet with comprehensive documentation of the security implementation and findings. The receptionist directed me to the executive conference room on the top floor, where I found Richard Hastings pacing by floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear. Maxwell sat at the table reviewing papers with an expression of growing concern. Neither recognized me immediately in my formal business attire. They had only seen me in casual clothes at family gatherings. "The security consultant is here," the receptionist announced before departing. Richard ended his call and turned to me, relief briefly crossing his features before confusion set in. You're from CyberShield?" "Lonnie Walker, lead security architect," I replied professionally, extending my hand. "I understand you're experiencing some critical system issues." Maxwell's head snapped up, recognition dawning. "Wait, you're Amanda's brother?" "I'm also the senior consultant managing your company's security infrastructure," I confirmed, setting up my laptop. "I've been reviewing the situation and have identified several areas of concern." Richard's face cycled through confusion, realization, and finally anger. "What the hell is going on here? Is this some kind of joke?" "Not at all, Mr. Hastings. I'm responding to an urgent client issue, as requested." I turned my laptop screen toward them, displaying a dashboard of their system status. "Your company is experiencing payment processing failures due to enhanced security protocols recently implemented to protect against fraud and unauthorized transactions." "We never authorized any changes to our system." Richard's voice rose as his face reddened. "Actually, you did." I pulled up the email notification sent the previous week, with a read receipt confirmation from Richard's account. "These enhanced measures are standard for financial protection in high-value business environments. Similar protocols have been implemented for all our premium clients." Maxwell leaned toward his father. "He's messing with our systems because of the wedding situation," he muttered, not quite quietly enough. I maintained my professional demeanor. "Every action taken has been fully documented, follows industry best practices, and is designed to protect your company's assets. I'd be happy to walk you through the specific issues we're encountering." Richard composed himself with visible effort. "Our entire payroll system is frozen. 300 employees haven't received their paychecks. Vendor payments are stalled. Our wedding venue is threatening to cancel Amanda's reservation due to non-payment. Fix it now." "I understand the urgency," I replied calmly. "However, we've identified several transaction patterns that have triggered security flags. Before we can restore normal processing, these will need to be addressed." I turned my tablet toward them, displaying a summary of the questionable consulting fees to offshore entities. Richard's face paled slightly. "This is outrageous," Maxwell interjected. "You have no right to interfere with our business operations. We'll sue CyberShield for breach of contract, and you personally for implementing the security measures your company agreed to?" I supplied. "Everything I've done is not only legal, but necessary for proper financial security. The documentation is quite thorough." Richard studied me with new awareness. "This is about Amanda's wedding, isn't it?" "This is about security protocols," I corrected. "Though I find it interesting that you immediately connected system security to your decision to exclude me from my sister's wedding." The tension in the room was palpable. Richard glanced at the tablet display again, clearly uncomfortable with the transaction records visible there. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice lower. "I want to ensure your company's systems are secure and functioning properly," I replied. "That's my job." Before Richard could respond, the conference room door opened and Julian walked in, looking harried. "Dad, the caterer just called," and he stopped short, seeing me. "Lonnie, what are you doing here?" "Your fiancée's brother is apparently the one who's locked down our entire company, Richard said tightly. Julian looked between us in confusion. What? How? Mr. Walker is the security consultant from CyberShield, Maxwell explained with barely controlled anger. Apparently he's decided to use his position to hold our business hostage. That's a serious accusation, I noted calmly. And inaccurate. I've simply implemented standard security protocols that any responsible company should have in place. The fact that these protocols have identified numerous questionable transactions is not my doing. Julian stared at me. Is this because of the wedding invitation? Amanda has been miserable about that situation. Has she? I raised an eyebrow. She told me it was just easier this way. Julian had the grace to look ashamed. My parents felt that their colleagues and our family friends would be more comfortable with a certain type of guest, and my presence would lower the tone of your elegant affair, I suggested. Richard cut in, his businessman instincts finally overriding his anger. Let's be practical here. What will it take to resolve this situation immediately? We have a business to run and a wedding to finalize. The system requires proper verification and approval of flagged transactions, I explained. Once those are addressed, normal operations can resume. Richard's phone rang. He glanced at it and grimaced. It's Eleanor. The florist has canceled due to non-payment. He answered, stepping away from the table to speak in hushed tones. Julian took the opportunity to move closer to me. Lonnie, I know this looks bad. I should have stood up to my parents about the invitation. Amanda has been torn up about it. Not torn up enough to actually call me, I pointed out, or to insist her only brother be at her wedding. You don't understand the pressure she's under, Julian said. My family can be intense about their expectations. I understand perfectly, I replied. The question is whether Amanda understands what she's marrying into. A family that views her background as something to be erased rather than appreciated. Richard returned, his expression grim. Eleanor is beside herself. She's calling Amanda now. He fixed me with a hard stare. Name your terms, Walker. What exactly do you want? Professional respect, I said simply. For myself and my family. An acknowledgement that my security work is not just glorified IT, but essential to your business operations. And yes, an invitation to my sister's wedding, not as a reluctant concession, but with genuine welcome. The conference room phone rang. Maxwell answered, then grimaced. Amanda's here. She's coming up. Minutes later, Amanda burst into the room, looking between us all with confusion and growing anger. What is going on? Eleanor said the wedding vendors are canceling because of payment problems. And now I find out my brother is here? Someone explain. Now, I had never heard that tone from my sister before. Commanding, authoritative. In that moment, she reminded me of our mother at her strongest. Julian approached her, speaking gently. There's been a misunderstanding, honey. Lonnie is actually the security consultant from CyberShield who manages our company's systems. And apparently, Richard added acidly, he's using that position to retaliate for being excluded from your wedding. Amanda's eyes widened as she looked at me. Is that true? Partially, I answered honestly. I've implemented security protocols that your future father-in-law's company should have had all along. The fact that these protocols are identifying concerning transaction patterns and requiring proper verification is standard practice. So you're holding their business hostage until they invite you to the wedding? Hurt and anger flashed in her eyes. No, Amanda. I'm doing my job properly. The invitation issue just made me realize I'd been overlooking serious security vulnerabilities in their systems out of consideration for your relationship. I held her gaze. Just like I've been overlooking how these people have been systematically separating you from your family and your identity. The room fell silent. Amanda looked around at the Hastings men, then back to me. You told me it would be easier if I didn't attend your wedding, I continued. Softer now. Easier for whom, Amanda? For you? Or for the family that's been reshaping you into their image since the day you met Julian? Tears welled in her eyes. You don't understand how complicated this is. I understand loyalty, I replied. And I understand that the sister I grew up with would never have allowed anyone to exclude her brother from the most important day of her life. no matter how wealthy or influential they were. Amanda turned to Julian, who had the decency to look ashamed. "You told me your parents insisted," she said. "You said there was nothing you could do." "I should have pushed back harder," Julian admitted. "I was trying to keep peace between all sides. By sacrificing my brother?" Her voice broke. "The person who's been there for me my entire life?" Richard cleared his throat. "This is all very emotional, but we have a business crisis to resolve. Hundreds of employees waiting for paychecks, vendor relationships at risk, and a wedding in jeopardy," Maxwell added. Amanda wiped her eyes, straightening her shoulders. "Fix it," she said to Richard. "Whatever Lonnie is asking for, just do it." "It's not that simple," Richard began. "Actually, it is," I interrupted. "The system needs verification that the flagged transactions are legitimate. Once that's completed, and proper security protocols are acknowledged, everything can return to normal operation." I turned to Amanda. "And yes, I'd like to be at your wedding. Not because I forced an invitation, but because you want me there. Because we're family, the kind that sticks together even when it's inconvenient for wealthy in-laws." The confrontation between Amanda and the Hastings continued for nearly an hour. I watched my sister rediscover her voice as she questioned the family's treatment of me, of our parents, and ultimately of her. Julian, to his credit, finally stood by her side rather than his parents, admitting he should have been stronger in defending her wishes. By early afternoon, we had reached a resolution. Richard agreed to properly review the flagged transactions and implement the legitimate security measures I had recommended. A formal apology would be extended to my parents for their treatment at family events. And most importantly to Amanda, I would receive a proper invitation to the wedding, with Eleanor personally calling to apologize for the misunderstanding. As the meeting concluded, Amanda pulled me aside. "I'm so sorry, Lonnie. I got caught up in their world and lost sight of what matters." "Pancakes this Saturday?" I asked, referencing our old tradition. She smiled through tears. "I'll bring the blueberries." The morning of Amanda's wedding arrived with perfect early summer weather, clear skies and gentle breezes that rustled the elaborate floral arrangements at the Hastings Country Club. I arrived early, invitation in hand, though I no longer needed it. The staff greeted me with the same deference they showed all guests, a small but noticeable change from previous encounters. My parents were seated in the front row, equal in prominence to the Hastings family, another negotiated detail that Richard had reluctantly accepted. Mom looked beautiful in a new dress that Amanda had helped her choose. Dad uncomfortable but proud in his best suit. Eleanor Hastings approached as I entered the reception area. "Lonnie," she said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone accustomed to social obligations. "We're so pleased you could join us today." "Thank you, Eleanor. I wouldn't miss my sister's wedding for anything." The emphasis was subtle but clear. She nodded, understanding the subtext. Her apology 3 weeks earlier had been stiff but genuine, acknowledging that family connections should be respected regardless of background differences. While I harbored no illusions about suddenly being embraced as an equal in their eyes, a new understanding had been established. Respect didn't require warmth. It simply required recognition of boundaries. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the elaborate way the Hastings preferred, but with touches that were unmistakably Amanda. She had insisted on certain elements that reflected our family traditions, including having both Dad and me walk her down the aisle, a moment that brought tears to my eyes despite my determination to remain composed. Julian took me aside before the ceremony, while Amanda was still getting ready. "I want you to know I've learned from this," he said quietly. "I should have stood up to my family sooner. Amanda deserves better than being caught in the middle." "She does," I agreed. "And she needs a husband who will put her first, even when it's difficult." "I understand that now." He extended his hand. "I hope we can start fresh, as brothers-in-law." I accepted the handshake, reserving final judgment for his actions rather than words. "I hope so too." During the reception, I was called upon to give a speech as Amanda's brother. Standing before the assembled guests, a mix of Hastings' high society connections and the smaller contingent of our family friends, I chose my words carefully. "When Amanda and I were kids, she once fell from a tree she was climbing in our backyard," I began. She broke her arm in 2 places, and I carried her the 3 blocks home. The whole way, even through her tears, she kept telling me, "Don't tell Mom I was climbing higher than you said was safe." Even in pain, her first instinct was loyalty. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. I caught Amanda's eye as she smiled through happy tears. That loyalty has always been Amanda's greatest strength. Her capacity to care deeply and stand by those she loves. Today, she extends that loyalty to Julian and his family, creating a new circle of love and commitment. I raised my glass. But I know my sister well enough to be certain that expanding her circle doesn't mean abandoning its original center. To Amanda and Julian, may your marriage be built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and the courage to stand up for each other, even when it's difficult. The toast was met with warm applause. As I returned to my seat, I noticed Richard Hastings regarding me thoughtfully, perhaps seeing me in a new light. Later, during the dancing, Amanda pulled me onto the floor for a sibling dance. "That was a perfect speech," she said as we moved to the music, subtle but pointed. "I learned from the best," I smiled. "Mom always said, you can make a point without making an enemy." "I'm sorry I forgot that for a while," Amanda said, her expression turning serious. "I got so caught up in trying to fit into Julian's world that I started losing myself." "The important thing is you found your way back," I assured her. "And Julian seems to have grown a backbone in the process." She laughed. "He has. You should have seen him standing up to his mother about our honeymoon plans. She wanted us to join the family at their usual summer place, but Julian insisted we needed time alone." The weeks following the wedding brought gradual but meaningful changes. Eleanor approached my mother at the post-wedding brunch, engaging in what appeared to be genuine conversation rather than polite formalities. Richard cornered me as I was leaving, his businessman's pragmatism evidently overcoming personal pride. "Your security implementations have actually improved our operational efficiency," he admitted reluctantly, "though your methods were unconventional." "Sometimes unconventional approaches yield the best results," I replied. "In business and in family relationships." He nodded thoughtfully. "Indeed, perhaps we both learned something valuable from this situation." Amanda and Julian returned from their honeymoon more balanced than I had seen them in months. She had reclaimed elements of her authentic self, and he seemed more willing to support her independence from his family's expectations. When Eleanor attempted to dictate their Thanksgiving plans, Amanda calmly but firmly explained they would be splitting the holiday, lunch with the Hastings, dinner with our family. For my part, I made an ethical decision to transfer the Hastings Development Group account to another consultant at CyberShield. While the security measures I had implemented remained in place, I recognized the potential conflict of interest in continuing to manage their systems. This professional boundary setting earned me unexpected respect from Richard, who acknowledged the integrity of the decision during our final handover meeting. My career benefited from the situation as well. My handling of the complex security crisis, as it was known within CyberShield, demonstrated both technical expertise and client management skills that caught the attention of senior leadership. 3 months later, I was promoted to Director of Security Operations, with a substantial increase in both responsibility and compensation. Perhaps most importantly, Amanda and I restored our monthly pancake tradition. The first Saturday, after she returned from her honeymoon, she arrived at my apartment with fresh blueberries and the special maple syrup our grandmother used to send from Vermont. "I missed this more than I realized," she said, as we sat at my small kitchen table, plates piled with slightly misshapen but delicious pancakes. "The pancakes or the company?" I teased. "Both." She grew serious. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Lonnie, even when I was making terrible choices." "That's what family does," I replied simply. "We hold each other accountable because we care." "I understand now what you meant about the Hastings trying to erase my background," she admitted. "They wanted me to fit their mold rather than appreciating who I already was." Julian sees it too now. "The experience taught me valuable lessons about family loyalty, self-respect, and the courage to enforce boundaries. Standing your ground, even against powerful opposition, can actually earn respect rather than destroy relationships. The Hastings family would likely never fully embrace me or my parents as equals, but they had learned to show respect, and that was enough. My relationship with Amanda emerged stronger and more authentic. The artificial distance created by the Hastings influence had been replaced by honest communication and renewed appreciation for our shared history. We could disagree, even argue sometimes, but the foundation of loyalty remained unshaken. In the end, the keys to happiness weren't found in accessing exclusive country clubs or gaining approval from wealthy in-laws. They came from maintaining integrity, establishing clear boundaries, and valuing authentic connections over superficial acceptance. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who was trying to separate you from a loved one? Would you have handled the situation differently than I did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more tales of family challenges and triumphs. Remember, sometimes the most important battles we fight are for the relationships that truly matter. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always find the courage to protect your most precious connections.